On September 23, 2005, Emily Carter, a 24-year-old nurse from Richmond, vanished without a trace while hiking alone in the Appalachian Mountains. She had planned a weekend retreat, escaping the stresses of her demanding job in the ICU to recharge in the peace of nature. A seasoned hiker, Emily was no stranger to the mountains, having grown up surrounded by them. Her father, a rock climbing instructor, and her mother, a biology teacher with a love for outdoor expeditions, had instilled in her a deep connection to the wilderness from a young age. But this hike would be different. Emily, though familiar with the trails, embarked on this journey alone, with no detailed plan, merely telling a friend she would follow a well-known route near Sky Meadows Pass. What was meant to be a quiet weekend in the wilderness soon turned into a mystery that would captivate the nation. When Emily didn't return on time, and with no word from her, panic set in. As the days passed without any sign of her, a sense of dread began to mount. What had happened to Emily Carter? And why, after all these years, would her disappearance remain so hauntingly unresolved? It was a crisp morning on September 22, 2005, when Emily Carter left her flat in Richmond, her backpack packed, ready for a brief escape from the daily grind of life as a nurse in the ICU. She had been working long hours, and this solo hiking trip in the Appalachian Mountains was meant to provide the rest and solitude she craved. The familiar landscape of the mountains had always been a source of comfort for her. She knew the trails like the back of her hand, having spent years hiking with her family. Emily's parents, both avid outdoor enthusiasts, had taken her on countless trips growing up. Her father, John, had been a rock climbing instructor for many years, while her mother, Susan, a biology teacher, had taken her students on nature expeditions. Emily had inherited that deep appreciation for nature, for its peace, and for its unpredictability. The morning of her departure, Emily set off early in her red Honda Civic, heading towards the Blue Ridge Mountains. The drive was an hour or so from Richmond, a pleasant, calming journey as she made her way to the starting point of her hike. She made a quick stop at a gas station in Front Royal, just as she had done many times before on her hiking trips. The cashier, Mark Davis, remembered her well. She asked about the weather conditions in the mountains, bought a bottle of water, and picked up some extra batteries for her flashlight. Nothing seemed unusual. It was just another routine stop for a seasoned hiker preparing for a weekend in the wild. But something about the way she asked about the weather, the quiet determination in her eyes, seemed to hint that Emily was preparing for something more than just a casual walk in the woods. By 10:30 a.m., Emily had reached the trailhead at the Stony Man Overlook. She signed the visitor log, noting that she would be returning on Sunday, September 25th, and added a simple remark that she was hiking alone. This was a common sight on the trail's solitary hikers, drawn to the solitude and serenity that the Appalachian Mountains offered. The trail itself was moderate in difficulty, taking about 3 hours to ascend and 2.5 hours to descend. Emily's experience in these mountains meant she was well equipped for the journey, and with her plans marked clearly, there was little cause for concern. However, just a few hours later, everything would change. At approximately 2 p.m., Emily was seen by David Riggs, another hiker on the trail. He and his wife Carol were descending when they crossed paths with Emily, who was headed down the trail in the opposite direction. They exchanged pleasantries, nothing unusual about the encounter. Emily appeared calm, composed, and unhurried. She was dressed in her usual hiking gear, a dark blue jacket, jeans, and sturdy brown boots, with her gray backpack slung over her shoulders. They briefly spoke, and then continued on their separate ways, unaware that this would be the last time anyone would see her alive. The hours passed, and Emily never returned. When Monday came, her colleagues at the hospital began to wonder where she was. She hadn't shown up for work, and her phone remained unanswered. Her friend Rachel Thomas, who had known Emily for years, was immediately concerned. She had spoken with Emily just before the trip, and knew the hike was supposed to be a short, relaxing getaway. When Rachel couldn't reach her, she contacted Emily's boss, Barbara Cole, who also grew worried. Still, It wasn't until Tuesday morning that the Richmond police were contacted, and even then, they hesitated to file a missing person report. After all, Emily had only been gone for a little more than 48 hours. It was only on the Wednesday that the search officially began. The initial response to Emily's disappearance was sluggish. The authorities were unsure, and the trail seemed vast and overwhelming. But the growing sense of tension was undeniable. The peaceful hike Emily had set out on was quickly overshadowed by the harsh reality of her absence. The simple preparation for a weekend escape had now become the catalyst for one of the most puzzling and tragic disappearances in the region's history. The search for Emily Carter began in earnest on the 28th of September, 2005, just days after she was last seen on the Blue Ridge Trail. Initially, it was a small team of rangers and volunteers who set out into the vast, untamed wilderness, determined to find any trace of the missing young woman. The mood was tense but hopeful after all. Emily had disappeared on a familiar trail, and with her experience, it seemed unlikely that she would simply vanish without a reason. Yet, as the days stretched on, a creeping sense of dread began to take hold. The searchers covered the main trail and its offshoots, checking every ravine and side path they could find within a 2-mile radius. The weather, however, worked against them, with persistent rainfall washing away any scent the tracking dogs could have used to pick up Emily's trail. Each time they thought they were getting close, another obstacle presented itself. No clear evidence, no fresh footprints, no signs of her backpack or belongings. The rangers scoured the landscape with methodical precision, but the mountains seemed to hold their secrets tightly, refusing to give up any clue. Despite the determined efforts, the searchers were left with nothing but a wrapper from the energy bar. Emily had bought at the gas station a small piece of evidence that led nowhere. The frustration was palpable. With each passing day, the reality of the situation sank deeper. Emily Carter, a seasoned hiker, had vanished into the wilderness, and no one could figure out why or where she had gone. As the search stalled, Emily's parents, John and Susan Carter, arrived from North Carolina, desperate to find their daughter. John, a man with years of hiking experience, immediately joined the search teams, offering his insight and suggestions. He believed that Emily might have taken a detour to visit one of the waterfalls she loved so much as a child. His familiarity with the terrain gave the search renewed focus, but still, no sign of Emily was found. Days turned into weeks, and the search grew even more desperate. The authorities expanded their efforts, using helicopters to survey hard-to-reach areas, but it seemed as though Emily had simply vanished. The Park Service called off the search on October 20th, officially classifying the case as one of a missing person. Emily's family refused to give up, though, and continued searching independently, desperately hoping for some breakthrough. The more they looked, the more it became clear. The mystery of Emily's disappearance was growing deeper, not clearer. The mounting sense of helplessness and confusion created a deep unease. Emily's parents, especially her father, had an unwavering belief that their daughter was out there somewhere, and they refused to accept that she might simply be lost forever. This intense personal involvement added a layer of emotional weight to the case, making the search feel like more than just a recovery effort. It was a race against time, with the parents' love for their daughter propelling them forward, no matter how difficult or futile the task seemed. The increasing mystery surrounding Emily's disappearance kept the pressure on. The sense of uncertainty was overwhelming, yet it only served to heighten the desire to uncover the truth. Each day without new evidence felt like a day lost, but the search continued relentlessly. The stakes were high. Not only was Emily missing, but the deeper implications of her disappearance began to reveal themselves, suggesting that something more sinister might be at play. What had happened to Emily? Where had she gone? The questions were mounting, and with them, the suspense, pulling the audience deeper into the mystery. As the search for Emily Carter continued to stall, the case began to shift from a missing person inquiry to something far more complex. By the time Detective Robert Clark took over the investigation, it had already been several weeks since Emily disappeared, and the trail had grown cold. The local police had searched the mountains, but with no sign of Emily, no clear leads, and no obvious suspects, the case seemed to be slipping into the realm of the unsolved. Clark, however, was determined to dig deeper. The detective's first move was to trace Emily's last known contacts. He reviewed her phone records, which mostly contained work-related calls and conversations with her family, but one number stood out: Brad Morrison. He had been in contact with Emily multiple times in the months before her disappearance, and this raised a flag for Clark. Morrison, a local hiking guide, had met Emily during one of his tours, and the two had exchanged phone numbers after a brief encounter. At first glance, their relationship seemed harmless, just a friendly connection between a hiker and a guide. But Clark wasn't convinced. He decided to pay Morrison a visit. Morrison initially appeared cooperative, telling Clark that his relationship with Emily was entirely professional, with no romantic involvement. The guide claimed that he had last seen Emily in late July during a group hike, but when Clark pressed him about the weekend of her disappearance, Morrison's story began to change. He initially claimed that he had led a tour group to Dark Hollow Falls, but when the detective checked with the tour company, the record showed that the tour had been canceled due to bad weather. This discrepancy raised suspicions. Morrison quickly altered his story, now claiming he had stayed home alone that weekend, an explanation that didn't quite add up. The detective wasn't satisfied with Morrison's shifting story, so he requested a search of his home and car. In Morrison's car, Clark discovered several suspicious items: bloodstains in the trunk and an unsettling collection of outdoor gear. The stains were sent for analysis, but the results only deepened the mystery. The blood didn't belong to Morrison, but rather to a deer. Morrison explained the stains away by saying he had helped a friend transport a carcass after a hunt, and his friend, Kyle Johnson, confirmed the story. The alibi seemed plausible at first, but something about it didn't sit right with Clark. He didn't have enough evidence to charge Morrison, but he knew the guide was hiding something. As the investigation stalled, Emily's parents, desperate for answers, turned to private investigator Samuel Hart. Hart was known for his success in solving missing person cases and had a reputation for uncovering the smallest details. His involvement brought new focus to the case. Hart re-interviewed key witnesses and examined the evidence from a fresh perspective. During his investigation, Hart uncovered a troubling history. Brad Morrison had been involved in several incidents with women before. In 2003, a tourist named Jessica Wright had filed a complaint, accusing Morrison of harassment during a hike. The case never went to trial due to lack of evidence, but it was a red flag. Further inquiries revealed another complaint from a woman named Linda Rogers, who had reported that Morrison had persistently invited her on private hikes, despite her clear objections. Hart's findings raised even more questions about Morrison's character, and the private investigator shared his concerns with Detective Clark. Clark, now certain that Morrison was hiding something, decided to dig deeper into his past. But just as the investigation was gaining momentum, Morrison disappeared. The guide's sudden vanishing act only added to the mystery. His colleagues from Blue Ridge Adventures said they hadn't heard from him in days, and his car was found abandoned, locked, with his personal belongings still inside. The twist in the case was undeniable. Morrison, once a potential witness, now seemed like the prime suspect. His sudden disappearance added an eerie layer to the investigation. Had he run because he knew his time was running out? Or was he simply hiding from the truth? The detective believed the latter, but with Morrison gone, the case became even more complicated. What had happened to Emily Carter, and why had Brad Morrison's behavior seemed so deceptive? The investigation now faced the daunting task of uncovering the truth, all while the shadows of doubt and suspicion loomed larger than ever. As the months passed, the investigation into Emily Carter's disappearance slowly began to lose momentum. Despite the tireless efforts of Emily's family and the authorities, no new evidence had surfaced, and the case seemed to fade from public consciousness. The once hopeful search for clues had turned into a routine of dead ends, and the local community, once gripped by the mystery, began to move on with their lives. But for Emily's parents, John and Susan, and for those still haunted by her sudden disappearance, the case remained a painful void that refused to be filled. Then, in the summer of 2006, something strange occurred. A report came in that a woman resembling Emily had been spotted in the mountains. The sighting was brief, a fleeting glimpse of someone in a blue jacket on the trail near Lewis Falls. But when rangers and search parties arrived at the scene, there was no trace of the person. The woman seen by the ranger was not Emily, and yet the possibility that she could have been someone who looked like her was enough to reignite a faint flicker of hope. However, despite several similar reports, nothing substantial ever materialized, and the sightings gradually became just another layer of uncertainty in a case already shrouded in mystery. As the months stretched on, the case of Emily's disappearance was quietly filed away, officially marked as a cold case. The lack of progress, coupled with the absence of any new leads, left the investigation in limbo. Detective Robert Clark had retired, his work on Emily's case fading into the background, and was replaced by a younger investigator, Daniel Walker. While Walker briefly revisited the case, the truth was that the investigation had stalled. Emily's parents, crushed by the passage of time and the growing sense of hopelessness, had no choice but to accept the painful reality that their daughter may never be found. Then, as if adding a new twist to the already unsettling narrative, Brad Morrison, the hiking guide who had been a key figure in the investigation, mysteriously disappeared. At first, it was just a rumor, a whisper in the wind. Morrison had failed to show up for work, hadn't answered his phone, and no one had seen him for days. His colleagues at Blue Ridge Adventures assumed it was nothing more than a personal issue, but the disappearance began to feel more like a sinister development. Days turned into weeks, and Morrison's vanishing act grew more suspicious. It wasn't long before he was officially reported as missing, and the strange coincidence of his disappearance occurring just after the police had focused so intently on him raised new, unsettling questions. For Emily's family, Morrison's disappearance only deepened the sense of confusion and dread. Had he known something the authorities didn't? Had he fled, aware that he was under suspicion? Or had something darker happened to him too? The connection between Morrison's sudden disappearance and the mysterious death of Emily Carter seemed to suggest that there was more to the story than anyone had realized. The more time passed without any fresh developments, the more the case seemed to slip into the shadows, but the growing uncertainty kept people on edge. The sense of fading hope was palpable, but the mystery remained unresolved, and with every passing year, the question lingered. Was there still a chance to uncover the truth? Morrison's disappearance, much like Emily's, added another layer of complexity to an already twisted tale, and those left searching for answers couldn't help but wonder if the two were somehow connected. Yet, with no new leads and no closure in sight, the case of Emily Carter remained an enigma, a haunting mystery suspended in time. 5 years after Emily Carter's disappearance, the case had grown cold, and the search for answers seemed to be fading into the forgotten corners of time. The woods where Emily had last been seen were vast, and despite numerous efforts, no one had been able to piece together the mystery of what happened to her. Then, in the autumn of 2010, an unexpected twist brought the case back into the spotlight. Local hunters, Rick and Dave Patterson, were in the Shenandoah Mountains tracking a wounded deer when they ventured into a remote part of the forest. As they moved through the dense undergrowth, the deer disappeared behind an ancient oak tree, its roots sprawling like fingers into the earth. In their search for the animal, Rick glanced down and saw something strange. A set of human bones partially covered by dirt and leaves, tucked under the massive roots of the tree. At first, Rick thought it might have been an animal carcass, but as he looked closer, it became clear that these were human remains. The bones were eerily preserved, and next to them, items of clothing and a backpack lay scattered among the debris. He immediately recognized the significance of the find and called the police. The Patterson brothers, knowing the importance of preserving the scene, did not touch the remains, leaving everything as they had found it. When Detective Daniel Walker and forensic experts arrived, the gravity of the discovery set in. They meticulously photographed the site and began the delicate process of recovering the remains. Among the bones, the forensic team found clear signs of trauma. The medical examiner, Dr. Dorothy Lang, noted that several ribs in the skull showed thin, precise cuts, as though made with a sharp instrument. These cuts didn't appear to be the result of an animal attack, but rather something more deliberate. The sharp, neat nature of the wounds raised immediate suspicions that these injuries were inflicted with purpose. Further examination of the clothing found with the remains revealed even more unsettling details. Emily's dark blue jacket, still distinguishable despite the years of exposure, showed strange patterns made by vegetable glue. The glue, typically used by hunters to fashion traps for small animals, was smeared in several places on the fabric, forming an odd, irregular pattern. It seemed inexplicable. Why would Emily's jacket be treated in such a way? It raised even more questions, and the strange discovery of a small, roughly carved wooden figure beside the skull added to the growing list of bizarre evidence. The carving, resembling an animal, possibly a deer or a dog, looked primitive and crude, yet the tools used to create it were highly skilled. There were no fingerprints on the figure, but the carving appeared to have been made recently, likely before Emily's death. Along with the carving, personal items were found in Emily's backpack. Her driver's license, credit cards, and a photograph of her parents were carefully tucked inside a plastic wallet, but the one item missing was her mobile phone. The absence of her phone, along with her money and first aid kit, seemed out of character. Emily had always been prepared for her solo hikes, and she would never have left without such essential items. The more the forensic team examined the scene, the more it became clear that this was no ordinary disappearance. The manner in which the body had been placed under the tree, the precise cuts on the bones, and the strange wooden carving all pointed to something far darker than a simple hiking accident. It was as though Emily's death had been part of some twisted ritual, one that had yet to be fully understood. For Detective Walker, the discovery of Emily's remains marked a pivotal moment in the case. No longer just a missing persons case, the evidence was now pointing towards a deliberate act of violence, and the investigation would need to take an entirely new direction. As the pieces began to fall into place, the chilling truth about what had happened to Emily slowly started to emerge, yet, as always with these cases, the full story remained just out of reach. The mystery of Emily Carter's death was far from over. As the investigation into Emily Carter's death deepened, a chilling new lead emerged that would send the case spiraling into even darker territory. It was during a routine review of the evidence that the name Walter Hines surfaced, a local woodcarver with a curious connection to the area where Emily's remains had been found. Hines was a man who, on the surface, seemed unremarkable. A reclusive figure who had lived in a small cabin near the Shenandoah Mountains, spending his days carving wooden figures for tourists. But as Detective Walker dug further into his background, he uncovered a disturbing pattern that linked Hines to Emily's death and to a series of other disappearances in the region. The breakthrough came when Walker examined a map found in Hines's old workshop. It was covered in markings, with red crosses drawn over locations in the mountains. Most of the marks were near sites where hikers had vanished over the years, places that, until now, had remained unsolved mysteries. Next to each cross, there were initials and dates. The map seemed to suggest that Hines had been keeping track of the missing individuals, almost as if he was compiling a personal record of his work. Among the markings was the cross for the location where Emily's body had been discovered, marked with the initials EK and the date of her disappearance. But it was the other marks that sent a chill down Walker's spine. One marking was next to the location where Brad Morrison's car had been found, his initials BM written clearly beside it, accompanied by the date of his disappearance. As the pieces began to fall into place, the terrifying implications of the map became clear. Walter Hines was not just a bystander. He was possibly involved in the deaths of several hikers. The fact that his markings on the map aligned with the locations of disappearances made it seem more than likely that he had played a direct role in these events. It was as if the woodcarver had been silently stalking his victims, keeping a record of their disappearances, perhaps even selecting them as part of some twisted ritual. The more Walker learned about Hines, the more sinister his story became. Hines had been living alone in the mountains for years, known to venture into the woods at odd hours, sometimes returning with strange objects or freshly carved figures. Neighbors spoke of his isolation, his reluctance to socialize, and his odd, sometimes unsettling manner. He had never been directly linked to any crimes before, but there was always something about him that seemed out of place, something that didn't quite fit with the peaceful image he projected. Now, it seemed, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, and they pointed to Hines as a key suspect in the series of disappearances. The investigation into Hines took a chilling turn when it became clear that he had vanished. His small cabin was found empty, the door left ajar, his tools still scattered on the workbench, and his personal belongings untouched. He had simply disappeared without a trace, just as Morrison had, leaving the authorities with more questions than answers. Had he gone into hiding, realizing that the investigation was closing in on him? Or had something even darker happened to him? The discovery of his disappearance only added to the mystery, fueling the growing belief that Hines was somehow involved in a string of murders. The case had now evolved into something far more terrifying than anyone had imagined. What had started as a missing persons case had transformed into a chilling series of murders, with Hines at the center. His map, the connection to other missing hikers, and his disappearance all pointed to a man who had been living a double life, one that no one had suspected. As the investigation turned inwards, it became clear that the case of Emily Carter's death was just one piece of a much larger, far more sinister puzzle. And the question now was whether Hines was the sole perpetrator or whether there were others involved in this twisted mystery, waiting to be uncovered. The shocking revelation of Hines' possible involvement changed the direction of the investigation completely, propelling it into a new, darker phase, and leaving the authorities and the viewers desperate to uncover the truth. After years of uncertainty, the truth about Emily Carter's death and the series of disappearances in the Appalachian Mountains was finally uncovered. The investigation had led detectives down numerous dead ends, but the shocking discovery of forensic evidence left no doubt. Walter Hines was the serial killer responsible for the deaths of not only Emily, but also Brad Morrison and several other unfortunate victims. Forensic analysis had linked Hines to the crimes in several disturbing ways. Blood and hair found at his workshop matched that of the missing hikers, and the wooden carvings found near their remains were traced back to Hines. The craftsmanship unique to his hand revealed that the carvings were not just souvenirs, but part of a macabre ritual that Hines had been carrying out in secret. With the confirmation of his role in the murders, the investigators finally had the answers they had been searching for. But the final twist was that, just as the investigation seemed to be closing in on him, Hines disappeared, leaving behind only traces of his presence and a map that hinted at his involvement in even more deaths. His vanishing act marked the end of the investigation, leaving behind more questions than answers. Despite the closure brought by the discovery of Hines' involvement, a sense of unease lingered. The case had started as a missing persons report and evolved into a chilling journey into the mind of a serial killer whose actions had remained hidden in plain sight for years. For Emily's family, while they had finally received the answers they desperately needed, the truth did little to ease the pain of their loss. The mountain trails, once a place of beauty and serenity, had now become a haunting reminder of the horrors that had unfolded there. As we conclude the story of Emily Carter, Her tragic fate serves as a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk in even the most peaceful of places. If you've been captivated by this story and the chilling revelations that came with it, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more true crime mysteries. Stay tuned as we delve into more unsolved cases, uncovering the truth one piece at a time. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode. Join us as we continue to explore the eerie, unsettling world of real-life mysteries.